your favorite Canadian filmmaker who's still in Canada? There's a lot of amazing Canadian artists, especially in comedy and drama and Hollywood, but they don't stick around in Canada. There's reasons for that. I think that the Canadian cultural industries suffocate more than they breathe life into. I think if you want evidence of that, look no further than Pablo Rodriguez and his ham-fisted attempt to help, I put in quotes, the news industry. In fact, he's desperately hurt them with his Bill C-18 and the reaction from Google and Facebook. But put that aside, what I'm really interested in is who is telling the stories, the current political stories of our country. And if you're having trouble coming up with a name, it's because so many of our best storytellers have left, and I wish they would stay and fight. And today's special guest could make it in the big time if he went to Hollywood. If he went to New York or LA or London, our next guest would be a huge success. But like you and me, he feels a deep commitment to Canada and he wants to stay and fight. At least that's my assessment of him. You know who I'm talking about when I say documentary filmmaker. I'm talking about our friend Aaron Gunn, and he's got a doozy out. Please welcome Aaron Gunn, the documentary filmmaker behind Fractured Nation, the pillaging of Western Canada. Aaron, great to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Ezra. It's always a pleasure to come on to chat with you.
Well, your documentary films have been beautifully presented, and you tackle difficult issues that I don't think the regime media likes to talk about. I mean, you did Vancouver, you have a great feature on Vancouver, which really, I mean, that went super viral, showing the state of that city. You did a national version. Facebook limited you, and YouTube too. Your story is so powerful that you know when the corporate censors get involved that you hit a nerve. Tell us about your new documentary, Fractured Nation. Why don't we start off by playing the cold open to it? Let's play a clip just to give people a taste of it, and then I'd love you to talk a bit more about it. Here, let's take a look.
The other Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, he just wanted to steal our wealth. He didn't want to extinguish it.
Right from the entrance into Canada, there was this dynamic of Ottawa versus the West.
From the West, it looks like they're stealing our oil again. But from the East, it looks like the wise, civilized people are keeping the barbarians under control.
The logic of it is killing the goose that lays the golden egg. But that's done on purpose.
Welcome to Alberta, the epicenter of the growing political and economic influence of Western Canada, and also increasingly much frustration, angst, and Western alienation. From the imposition of carbon taxes to the tens of billions of dollars plundered through equalization, this is a province and region fed up with a federal government and prime minister that they view as antagonistic, exploitive, and directly undermining their legitimate aspirations. So what does this mean for Canada and its future? Do more powers need to be devolved to the provincial level? Do the West's contributions need to be better recognized by the country as a whole? Or is the dream that was Confederation already so far gone that it's best if we all just go our separate ways?
The problem you have in Canada, I think, is a structural one. Most provinces pay, and Quebec, as one entity, receives. There's just nothing equitable about that.
It's kind of a welfare of the Confederation. That's how I see it. No, I don't see anything being proud of that.
My name is Aaron Gunn, and this is Politics Explained.
Wow. You talked to some very important thought leaders, not just Premier Danielle Smith, but I saw John Robson, great historian and scholar, Barry Cooper, longtime professor in Calgary, Brett Wilson, Dragon's Den entrepreneur, Alberta booster, Eric Duhem, the leader of the new Conservative Party of Quebec, did a great job. You really talked to a wide swath of people. I mean, you're based in the West yourself. This looks like it's got a bit of an Alberta vibe to it. What made you make this movie? What was your goal?
I think my goal was, as it is with all my documentaries, to tell stories and reveal truths that Canadians aren't hearing from anywhere else or from very few places. And with me as someone who's grown up in BC, I've noticed there's a disconnect in Western Canada. You see that in everything from kind of the way the country is structurally set up in our Constitution to the corporate welfare you always see going out east. And then most prominently, when I really dug into it, the billions of dollars plundered through equalization that go from Western provinces that actually develop their resources to Eastern provinces that either don't develop the resources or in some cases actually block attempts at the West to get our most precious commodities to overseas markets. So I thought it was an important story, but it also stems, as you alluded to kind of in the intro, Ezra, with a really deep passion that I actually have for Canada. We chat with people who think it's over, who think it's Alberta would be better off, or Alberta and Saskatchewan and BC would be better off separating. I believe that this confederation is in crisis, but I believe that with documentaries like this and with coming together, we can still kind of pull this, turn this country around. So that's really the thesis behind the documentary. And the other individual that we interviewed that wasn't featured in the cold open there was the Premier of New Brunswick, who's obviously been in the news a lot lately, and who I think had a lot of powerful things to say on this topic.
Wow. Well, you certainly had access to a lot of leading thinkers. And let me ask you a question. I'm an Alberta boy, born and raised. I moved out to Ontario when the Sun News Network started over 10 years ago, and I've stayed. So I can't really call myself an Albertan anymore. I mean, I've been out here for too long, although I think I'm a Westerner at heart. How do you talk about legitimate Western grievances, feeling left out, feeling marginalized, feeling like power is not properly shared? How do you talk about that when in some ways power is a zero-sum game? If you have more power for Alberta within Confederation, that pretty much certainly means less power for Ontario and Quebec. And if you have grievances against Central Canada, how are Ontarians and Quebecers responding? And I say this as someone whose heart is in the West, but I'm here in Ontario. And frankly, I think a lot of Ontarians and even more Quebecers, they don't even think about the West. And if they do, you know, maybe there's a condescension and maybe there's a look down your nose-ishness. But how do you get Ontario and Quebec to help rather than push them away?
Big thing for me is I think the uniting factor has to be provinces coming together and people in those provinces coming together to push back against the federal government's creeping desire to centralize power. With Quebec, who you just mentioned, I think that's where the greatest opportunity lies. It goes back to 1982 in the Constitution negotiations. I'm not a constitutional expert, but René Lévesque coming together with the Premier of Alberta at the time to demand Section 92A in the Constitution, to stand up for provincial rights and provincial autonomy. We're going to talk, I'm sure, later about what Danielle Smith's doing in Alberta with the Sovereignty Act, but in a lot of cases, these are things that Quebec has already done for years. Right. So I think there's actually a precedent set for different provinces coming together to stand up for provincial autonomy and a common framework that we can all work within Canada. But importantly, and this is something I keep coming back to, in my opinion, for this country to work in the long term, we all need to play by the same rules. And right now, I think in some cases, with Quebec specifically, we're not all playing by the same rules, and that creates issues.
Yeah. 25 years ago, I worked for Preston Manning, and one of the phrases he used, he said, our problem isn't with Ontario, it's with Ottawa. And I thought, you know what, that's actually right. And by the way, not all Ontario is Toronto, and not all Toronto is downtown CBC Toronto in the annex, by the way. I mean, there are a lot of sensible people everywhere, even in Quebec. Montreal and the liberal heartland is very much different from Quebec City or the rural parts. And that's part of the lifelong adventure of discovering your own country, especially if it's a place as big as this.